Two fake cops in cheap uniforms tried to break down my gate while I was doing push-ups, and a second later, I realized they were here to steal my land. That was their first mistake, and it's about to be their last. It's a quiet Saturday morning in Oak Ridge, the kind of day that feels like it's made for peace. I'm out back, grinding through my morning workout, sweat dripping onto the grass as I power through my push-ups, counting each rep with focus. The sun's just peeking over the trees, casting a golden glow, and I'm thinking about a lazy breakfast with my family, until a loud clang snaps me out of it. Metal slamming against my gate, hard enough to rattle the hinges. I bolt upright, instincts flaring like I'm back on a SWAT op, and sprint to the front. That's when I see them, two goons in ill-fitting uniforms, HOA enforcement badges glinting as they try to muscle their way in. "Hey!" I shout, storming over, my voice sharp enough to make them freeze. They turn, puffing out their chests like they're in charge, and one barks, "We're seizing this property. HOA violation. Seize my land." For what? I haven't even jaywalked in this sleepy suburb. I almost laugh, but their smug faces tell me they're dead serious. They think they can scare me off my own property with fake badges and a clipboard. Here's the twist that'll blow your mind. I'm not just some homeowner they can bully. I'm Mike Callahan, a retired SWAT commander with 30 years of taking down real threats. Drug lords, armed gangs, you name it. I've faced bullets, bombs, and high-stakes raids that would make these clowns run for their lives, and now they're trying to intimidate me? I don't pull a weapon, not yet. I just watch them, arms crossed, my training kicking in like second nature. Their badges are plastic, their uniforms don't fit, and they're shaking more than my kettlebell after a heavy set. "Go ahead," I say, my voice cold as steel, a warning they don't catch. "Step onto my land. See what happens." They smirk, crossing the line, clueless about the storm they've just unleashed. Oh boys, you've just picked a fight with the wrong guy. What happens when fake HOA cops try to mess with a SWAT vet who's seen it all? Buckle up, this story's about to explode, and you won't believe how it ends. Let me introduce you to Mike Callahan, a 55-year-old retired SWAT commander who's lived a life most of us only see in action movies. For 30 years, he led hundreds of high-stakes missions, busting drug cartels, rescuing hostages, and dodging gunfire like it was just another day at the office, until a bullet to the shoulder during a raid forced him to hang up his tactical gear, leaving him with a chest full of medals and scars that whisper stories he rarely tells. After retiring, Mike moved to Oak Ridge with his wife, Sarah, and their teenage son, Ethan, craving the quiet life he'd never had. He bought a private plot of land from an elderly villager. No HOA nonsense, just a peaceful haven where he could teach Ethan how to shoot a bow and arrow, plant watermelons with Sarah, and watch her eyes light up as they harvested their first crop together. It was the life he'd dreamed of, a chance to be the dad who's there for Ethan's school plays, to hold Sarah's hand without the buzz of a radio call pulling him away to danger. But peace didn't come easy in Oak Ridge. A new HOA had recently formed, led by Karen Baxter, a power-hungry control freak who acted like she'd been crowned queen of the suburb. Karen and her clique of newcomers wanted every blade of grass, every mailbox, every inch of property under their thumb, especially Mike's land, which she couldn't touch since it wasn't part of her HOA empire. She started with letters, demanding he join and pay fees, but Mike tossed them in the trash with a laugh. "I don't need a babysitter for my land," he'd say, shaking his head. That's when the petty harassment kicked in. Fake fines started piling up. $200 for an unpainted fence, $150 for excessive dog noise, even though their pup, Ranger, was quieter than a whisper. Karen would drive by, snapping photos, looking for any excuse to stir trouble, her clipboard a weapon in her suburban war. For Mike, this wasn't just annoying, it was a threat to the sanctuary he'd fought for. He'd spent decades protecting others, and now he'd protect his family's peace, no matter who came knocking. Karen didn't know it yet, but she'd picked the wrong guy to mess with. What happens when a battle-hardened commander faces a suburban tyrant with a clipboard? Let's find out. Things are about to get messy. The fuse lit one humid morning when Mike found a notice of land seizure slipped under his gate, bold print claiming the HOA was taking his property for violating community planning regulations. He scanned it, his SWAT-trained eye catching the fakes in seconds, a non-existent court, a photocopied signature, a seal that looked like it was printed on a cheap inkjet. "Karen, you've got to be joking," he muttered, tossing the paper onto his kitchen counter. This wasn't just petty nonsense anymore, it was fraud, and Mike knew she'd crossed a line that could land her in serious trouble with the law. Things turned uglier a few days later. Sarah was out front, watering her beloved flowers, humming softly to herself, when Karen parked across the street, snapping photos like a suburban paparazzi. That night, those pictures hit the HOA's online group chat, captioned, "Callahan violation, wasting water during restricted hours." Neighbors Karen had intimidated piled on, calling Sarah selfish and a disgrace to Oak Ridge. Sarah stormed inside, tears streaming down her face, showing Mike the post. "They're calling me a community wrecker," she sobbed, her voice trembling with hurt and humiliation. Then Ethan came home, his head hanging low. Kids at school had started shunning him, taunting, "Your dad's a rule breaker and your mom's ruining the neighborhood." Mike's blood boiled, his fists clenching so hard his knuckles turned white. He'd faced armed enemies without flinching, but seeing Sarah cry and Ethan hurt over Karen's vicious lies, that cut deeper than any bullet ever had. It was a declaration of war. The breaking point came a week later. Mike was on his porch, sipping coffee, trying to keep calm for his family's sake, when two men in ill-fitting uniforms marched up to his gate, their badges reading HOA enforcement. "Mike Callahan?" One barked, puffing out his chest. "We're here to seize this land. Vacate in 24 hours, or we'll do it for you." Mike set his mug down, sizing them up. Plastic badges, mismatched uniforms, no real authority. Karen's hired goons, not cops. He'd taken down cartels and gunmen without breaking a sweat, and now these clowns thought they could scare him? "You sure about this?" he asked, voice steady as steel, a warning in his eyes. They smirked, stepping forward, clueless about the storm they'd just unleashed. Mike wasn't just angry. He was ready to fight for his family and his home. What happens when a SWAT vet faces a fraud who's hurt his loved ones? Karen's about to find out the hard way. Mike didn't charge in swinging. He played it smart, like he had on every SWAT mission in his 30-year career. He started with the basics, evidence. As the HOA enforcement goons sped off in their beat-up truck, Mike snapped photos of their license plates, his phone camera zooming in for a clear shot. A quick call to an old buddy still on the force confirmed the plates belonged to a sketchy security firm out of state. Not cops, just hired muscle with a rap sheet longer than a CVS receipt. Next, Mike turned to the fake seizure notice, handing it over to Jake, a retired hacker neighbor who'd once been a tech wizard for the FBI. Jake traced the email Karen used to send HOA notices, his fingers flying over the keyboard as he muttered, "Let's see what this witch is hiding." What they found was a gold mine. Karen had set up the HOA as a front to seize surrounding lands, including Mike's, for a secret real estate project that would net her millions. She planned to flip the properties to a developer, using forged deeds to make it look like she owned them outright. The deeper they dug, the uglier it got. Karen had bribed a few local council members to falsify zoning records, making it seem like Mike's land, and others violated new regulations, scaring residents into selling cheap out of fear. Mike tracked down two families she'd already driven out, their stories breaking his heart. "She threatened to sue us into bankruptcy," one mother whispered, her eyes red from crying. "We had to leave everything behind." This wasn't just about his land anymore. It was about saving Oak Ridge from a predator in a pantsuit who'd turned their quiet suburb into her personal piggy bank. Mike kept building his case, recording every shady interaction with Karen's crew, saving every email, and documenting her every move, his SWAT training making him methodical and relentless. But evidence alone wouldn't stop her. Karen was slippery, and her HOA cronies were loyal. Mike needed to expose her in front of everyone. He devised a plan, a surprise community meeting to lay her crimes bare. He rallied the families she'd scammed, convincing them to speak out, their voices trembling but determined. "We're done being afraid," one said, gripping Mike's arm. Jake set up a projector to display the evidence live, and Mike called in a favor from a sheriff friend to have law enforcement on standby in case things turned messy. The meeting was set for Friday night at the community center, but Mike kept it hush-hush, spreading the word quietly to avoid tipping Karen off. He wanted her to walk in blind, thinking she still held all the cards. As the day approached, Mike felt the familiar adrenaline of a mission, the same rush he'd felt before storming a cartel hideout. But this time, it was for Sarah's tears, Ethan's hurt, and the neighbors who'd looked to him for hope. Old Mr. Peterson, a 70-year-old neighbor, grabbed Mike's hand, his voice shaky. "Thank you, son," he whispered, eyes glistening. "I've never seen anyone fight for us like this." Karen thought she could bully her way to a fortune, but she'd underestimated a commander who'd never lost a battle. What happens when a SWAT vet turns a quiet suburb into his battlefield? You're about to see a takedown that'll shake Oak Ridge to its core. Just when Mike thought he had Karen's number, a bombshell dropped from Mrs. Harper, the neighborhood's resident gossip, over a plate of her famous oatmeal cookies. Karen used to work for a shady law firm, she whispered, leaning in. They got shut down for forging land deeds, scamming folks into bankruptcy for developers. Mike's jaw tightened, but there was more. He teamed up with Jake, the retired hacker who'd once been a tech genius for the FBI, until Karen's HOA framed him as a disruptive resident and ran him out of Oak Ridge years ago. She cost me my home, Jake growled, his eyes hard as he cracked into Karen's cloud drive. They found a draft contract. Karen was already negotiating to sell Mike's land for a seven-figure sum to a third-party developer, using forged titles she'd been crafting for over a year, targeting every private lot that wouldn't bow to her HOA. For Jake, this wasn't just about helping Mike. It was revenge against the woman who'd destroyed his life. The plot thickened fast. Mike tailed one of the HOA enforcement goons harassing another neighbor, discovering they were unlicensed rent-a-thugs from out of state. No legal authority, just costumes and a script to scare folks. It was all a sham, but Karen's endgame was real. She was days away from finalizing the sale of Mike's land, using fake deeds to make it look like she owned it. Mike knew he had to act fast to stop her before she disappeared with the cash. He called Lisa, a federal attorney friend who specialized in fraud cases. "This is a slam dunk," Lisa said, flipping through the evidence. "Fraud, forgery, conspiracy. She's going down hard." But Mike wanted more than an arrest. He wanted Karen to incriminate herself on record. He proposed a sting. He'd call Karen, pretending to negotiate a deal to sell his land, and get her to confess her scheme while the feds listened in. Lisa set it up, Thursday afternoon at the HOA office, with hidden cameras, microphones, and a small tactical team parked nearby, ready to move in if things went south. Mike prepared like he would for any SWAT mission. He mapped out the office layout, rehearsed his lines to keep Karen talking, and planned every move to ensure she'd dig her own grave. This wasn't just about saving his land anymore. It was for Jake, who'd been broken by Karen's lies years ago, for Mrs. Harper, who'd lived in fear of her wrath, and for every neighbor Karen had scammed. A fight for redemption, led by a man who'd once been her victim, now her downfall, and a commander who never backed down. What happens when a con artist steps into a SWAT trap, with her own past betrayal coming back to haunt her? You're about to see justice strike like a lightning bolt. Don't blink. Friday night at the Oak Ridge Community Center buzzed with tension. Neighbors packed the room, their whispers filling the air like static. Karen strutted in, oozing confidence, her briefcase stuffed with forged documents, ready to play the queen of the suburb. She banged her gavel on the podium, her voice sharp as she declared, "We're here to finalize the seizure of Mike Callahan's property for non-compliance with HOA regulations." She held up a fake deed, waving it like a trophy, her smirk daring anyone to challenge her. The crowd shifted uneasily. Some bought her act, others looked nervous, but Mike? He stood in the back, arms crossed, a faint smile on his face, ready to spring his trap. Mike stepped forward, his voice cutting through the room like a gunshot. "Not so fast, Karen." He nodded to Jake, who fired up the projector, and the screen lit up with evidence. Forged deeds, emails with the developer, bank records showing payments funneled to Karen's personal account. Then came the recording from their negotiation meeting, Karen's smug voice echoing, "I take what I want, it's that simple." Gasps turned to shouts of outrage. Ruth, the HOA secretary who'd been Karen's loyal follower, stood up, tears streaming down her face. "I trusted you," she choked, her voice trembling with betrayal. "I wrote those lies for you. I hate myself for it." Karen's face turned ashen, her smirk vanishing as Ruth's words hit like a sledgehammer, stripping away her last shred of credibility. Before Karen could recover, Lisa, the federal attorney, strode in with 2 U.S. Marshals at her side. "Karen Baxter, you're under arrest for fraud, forgery, impersonating an official, and conspiracy to commit theft," Lisa announced, her tone cold and final. The Marshals moved in, cuffing Karen as she flailed, screaming, "I've been set up. This is a conspiracy." The fake HOA officers bolted for the door, but the sheriff's team nabbed them, wanted scammers from 3 states, now done. Their plastic badges clattered to the floor, and the crowd erupted in cheers, neighbors clapping and shouting in triumph. Karen was dragged out, Ruth's betrayal echoing as her final humiliation, her reign shattered in front of the people she'd terrorized. Mike watched it unfold, the weight lifting off his shoulders. He'd turned the tables with precision, exposing a fraud who'd preyed on trust. The cheers, Ruth's raw regret, it was justice, unfiltered and real. What happens when a SWAT legend dismantles a suburban scam, breaking not just the law but the spirit of a tyrant? You get a victory Oak Ridge will never forget. Karen's empire collapsed, and Oak Ridge exhaled in relief. The HOA was suspended, its operations frozen, with several board members either resigning in disgrace or facing bribery charges for their role in Karen's scheme. The community rallied, reclaiming their peace. Kids kicked soccer balls down the streets without noise fines, their laughter echoing freely, while adults gathered in yards, sharing stories without fear of Karen's clipboard. Freedom from HOA parties lit up the park, joy replacing years of dread. Mike became their hero, though he brushed it off with a humble smile. "He saved us," one neighbor said, voice thick with gratitude. Families filed lawsuits, using Mike's evidence to claw back what Karen had stolen, their hope restored after years of intimidation. Karen was convicted, prison-bound, her name a warning for petty tyrants everywhere. Mike felt the victory, but it wasn't about glory. He'd fought for Sarah's smile, Ethan's peace, and a town that deserved to live without fear. His land was safe, the fake cops were gone, and Oak Ridge was reborn, stronger than ever, united by the fight against a common enemy. At a community celebration, the mayor handed Mike a plaque, but he just said, "I protected who needed it." Sometimes, the good guys win, and this suburb wouldn't forget the commander who reminded them what courage looks like. Months later, Oak Ridge flourished like never before. Mike's land stood firm, his sanctuary with Sarah and Ethan untouched by Karen's schemes. He taught Ethan archery in the backyard, their laughter filling the air as arrows flew wide, gardened with Sarah, her smile brighter than the summer sun, and walked ranger without a single worry about noise violations. The HOA was a distant memory. Neighbors turned to Mike for advice on scams, dubbing him Oak Ridge's guardian, an unofficial protector who'd given them their freedom back. Karen rotted in jail, fraud, forgery, the works, her story a caution to would-be bullies, her name whispered as a warning across the state. Mike reflected one sunset, his arm around Sarah, the sky painted orange. "I used to think battlefields were where bombs fell," he said, voice steady and resolute. "But where people fear hanging a flag out front, that's where heroes are needed most." His fight left a legacy, a suburb tougher, a community that stood taller because of one man's courage. Ever faced a Karen trying to take what's yours? An HOA with insane rules? Share your story below. I want to hear how you fought back and won. Loved this epic showdown of a SWAT commander taking down a shady HOA? Smash that like button and share it with anyone who's ever battled a nosy neighbor or a power-hungry HOA. Subscribe and hit the bell so you don't miss more stories packed with justice, petty revenge, and suburban drama that'll keep you on the edge of your seat. I want to hear from you in the comments. Ever had an HOA pull a fast one on you? Fake fines, wild rules, spill the tea. Your story might just spark the next video. Maybe I'll even tell it in my next upload. Let's keep the fight for justice alive together.